Inescapably foreign. Welcome to Without Borders. If this is your first time tuning in, know that this is the podcast for nomads, immigrants, refugees, third culture children, or anyone else that feels inescapably foreign. Remember, I do have a website, withoutborders.fyi. You can tune in there to join the community and also read some more interesting articles about cultural psychology or get some more in-depth information about people's immigration experiences. Today, I am here with Dr. Matthew Niblett and Kristine Beuret. Matthew is the director of the Independent Transport Commission, which is Britain's foremost independent transport and land use think tank. Matthew holds a doctorate from the University of Oxford and was a senior research associate at the university's Transport Studies Unit. Kris is the director of Social Research Associates and a social scientist specialized in transport and urban policy. Kris has advised the House of Commons, Transport Committee, TfL, the DfT, and overseas governments on disability and diversity issues. In other words, I have a lot to learn from Kris and Matthew. And today we're focusing on the project and the book, Why Travel? So can you describe the project to us and why the ITC is carrying out this far-reaching study?
Thank you, Nolan. It's a great pleasure to be on the podcast today. The ITC is a travel and transport think tank, and so what we're particularly interested in are some of these really big questions, these long-term questions about the fundamental motivations that drive human movement, which is something which isn't either really studied in the academic world or often looked at in government. And we felt that there needed to be much more attention paid to understanding these motivations, which drive this absolutely crucial aspect of human existence. So the project really sort of started to begin to pull together expertise from a much wider body of knowledge than is normally found in the transport world, to try and really get a kaleidoscope of insights into the reasons that drive human travel, and with the hope that once we'd assembled that kaleidoscope of insights, the whole would be bigger than the sum of its parts, and we would then be able to hopefully get a much deeper and richer understanding of travel motivations. It's been a long time in the making, but we decided that perhaps the best way of disseminating this knowledge was through a book. So the project has been working to develop the book that was published last year by Bristol University Press. I think, I don't know whether that's in reverse, but I'm sure you can put a link up to the website in due course. The book itself brings together, I think, 12 insights from different areas, from biology to philosophy to sociology to economics, all exploring different aspects of what drives human travel, and we hope that together this is a kind of resource that people can use and find helpful in terms of thinking about this extraordinary capacity that humans have and desire that they have for travel.
Yeah, the book really covers everything when we think about why travel, right? It covers the biological, philosophical, economical, sociological, spiritual, anthropological, technological, right? I'm running out of calls here, but it really covers everything. Now, Kris, the section that you wrote and specialized in is the sociological part of it, correct?
That's right, yes. But before I go into that, I was just going to say, we could have had loads more chapters. So, for instance, there's one on literature, but what about music? What about art? What about photography? So lots of people who bought the book said, yes, but why didn't you have this chapter instead? And I think we could have gone on adding about 10 others in the end.
Do you think you will write an updated version, or do you think you'll update it on the website?
I think we'll do both, but I think what we will do is develop some arguments stemming from the book, because if you think about it, Nolan, at the moment, people are beginning to say, you know, we need to think about carbon, we need to stop traveling, particularly flying. And you know, so it's become a very apt debate, because the message of the book is actually there is a lot of value in travel, and we wouldn't be where we are as human beings today if we hadn't traveled. So that was, you know, that was a key message of the book, and it's very timely, with everyone saying, oh, I better not fly and see my granny for Christmas, you know.
Yes.
You asked me about
us
the sociology chapter. I just,
yes.
maybe we could come back to that, but that deals with things like the role of travel and people moving around the world in order to, for instance, better themselves. So the whole issue of social mobility has often depended on moving away from where you grew up to have a wider experience, to get a job, to, you know, experience a different culture, or even to, you know, as the biology chapter mentioned, to mix the gene pool. You know, where do people meet their partners? Imagine if they only met people in the village they lived in. It would be a very strange world, wouldn't it? So a lot of themes within the sociology chapter.
Definitely. And that biological perspective actually made me think of another study with the law of averageness, where we're attracted to averageness. Averages, of course, not being, oh, that person's a 5 out of 10 and that kind of superficial way of looking at it, but averages being the averageness of all faces. And some studies found that people are most attracted to mixed races, which also kind of makes me think about why we might intrinsically be motivated to travel as well, is to mix, as you say. And of course, that strengthens the gene pool and everything like that. Now, Kris, just touching on what you said earlier about the environmental aspects of it, and you said some people are scared to travel now because they don't want to have as much of a carbon footprint. What are some of the positive aspects environmentally? And Matthew, feel free to jump in here whenever you want as well.
Well, if I can just say, socially, it's important for people to experience other cultures. Not just, you know, because it's a good thing to do, but it's because it creates harmony. I do believe that by traveling, you understand people. I mean, you know, there is the other side of the coin, in that you go to another place and you just spend your whole life comparing how unfavorable it is with your own culture. But I think most people, when they travel, do gain an understanding, and most people are made very welcome when they travel. So I do think that that's an important thing. But, you know, the environmental challenge is definitely something we need to think about.
And what are some of the things you're thinking about right now with that?
I think some adverse effects of being too local. I mean, one of my company used to be in Leicester, which is a big multicultural city in the UK. And that is divided by religion. In one end of town, Muslims live, and the other end, Hindus. And the young people have been fighting each other. You know, all the shops are locally, they don't mix very much. And I think that epitomizes the need to people to mix and experience other cultures.
Definitely. Matthew, anything you want to add to that?
I think on the Kris is the expert on sociology on the environment side. I was going to just say one of the big policy problems that we're facing in the UK and elsewhere at the moment is how do you square the circle of satisfying people's this inherent desire to travel with the fact that at the moment, at least, a lot of travel is very carbon intensive. And there's a real conundrum there, because particularly for long distance travel, it's so carbon intensive that there's an increasing moral imperative perhaps to do less long distance travel than was the case in the past, at least until more carbon neutral ways of travelling can be found. So I think one of the themes in the book, though, is that it's really important when it comes to making policy that we don't just fall into the trap that we have to always be focusing on less travel per se. It's as much about encouraging better travel, and that tends to mean more sustainable ways of travel, perhaps focusing on what is imperfectly called slow travel, which tends to mean slow in terms of taking your time over it, rather than focusing on speed and distance so much, and also on the quality of our travel experiences, because frankly, as we know, some aspects of longer distance travel, particularly going through airports, for example, is not always a very happy or pleasant experience, and that time actually might be better spent focusing on more enjoyable forms of travel closer to home.
One of the issues that came out of the book was the way in which we make decisions about investment in transport. So at the moment in the UK, for instance, when you decide whether you're going to fund a new rail system, things like speed and journey time have a big impact on whether they think it's worth investing in that new railway. So we've got High Speed 2, nearly finished now from London to Birmingham, reducing the time from over an hour to 40 minutes. But a lot of people are saying, actually, 40 minutes is not a brilliant time for me to get my computer out and do a bit of work. And so, have we overestimated the value of time in travel, and is it more, as Matthew just said, to do with quality and what you do? Particularly now you can work whilst you're traveling, and so on. So that really is changing the goalposts, but I think the people who make investment decisions haven't really caught up with that.
Yeah,
definitely. And you touch on that in the book. I know it's kind of cliche to say, but the way you described in the book is much more in depth, but it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? I think it had a lot to do with that as well.
Do you
absolutely.
think also, Nolan, that this is something about travelling in itself, that you get to know people and talk to people, sit next to people who you wouldn't normally have a lot to do with? And a lot of people have told us how they quite enjoy that experience of talking and meeting other people on the train as they're cycling around the town, or even in an aeroplane,
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed it from my own life and just talking to others. Usually the best stories, whether they're adverse or not, are the journey itself, because that's usually where things go unexpected. And I think that's where the most interesting stories come out, is from these unexpected experiences, because you usually know a little bit about the destination. That's why you're going there, but you don't really know what to expect when you're traveling there. Right?
No, well, I once did a TV program with a man who I would call, fanatical car user. And he told me how he hated public transport because he didn't like this meeting other people. He found it quite scary. And he said, in my car, I'm cocooned in the if you like, the security of my own space. And I thought, well, that was kind of quite unusual. And I imagine a lot of people listening today would not take that view and would actually really enjoy travel, and maybe did a gap year traveling, or make a point of, say, going by rail across Siberia just for the hell of the experience,
Yeah, definitely. Well, a little bit later, I want to touch on the gap years, because you mentioned that in the book, and I wanted to hear about your gap year experiences, or one of your most pivotal experiences. But before we get into that, a little bit more about the environment. What else can we do to travel efficiently? I mean, when it comes to carbon, to make sure that we don't use too much carbon, and to travel in the most environmentally friendly possible way?
Well, I suppose one aspect is to focus on focus less on speed and distance, which pushes you towards forms of transport which tend, at least at the moment, to be more sustainable, and also perhaps to focus more on travel, which has an active element. One of the things that's clearly becoming more popular, for instance, is travel to places where, rather than spending your time zooming around, it involves hiking or walking through some aspects of the natural world, or some aspects of the local community in that country that you're kind of visiting. So those kind of activities are helpful. Kris?
I think also the ITC, this is the organisation Matthew and I represent, are doing some work at the moment on the future of technology. And I do really believe that if we have a need to do something, the technology often follows it, as it did with COVID, when we came up with vaccinations overnight. And the ITC is just about to publish a research study looking at the future in aviation and how that will reduce the carbon output. And I know some people are very pessimistic about it, and clearly there's a crisis at the moment, but I think I'm quite optimistic that in a few years we'll have cracked that. And I don't know, Matthew, you know more about that research than I do, but there are some very optimistic developments, aren't there?
For aviation, yes. I think the problem with aviation, just because of the nature of what it involves, it needs very energy intensive forms of propulsion. So the technological hurdle in terms of getting to a position where we can fly in a carbon neutral way is much higher than for other forms of transport. But at the same time, two areas where there's been a lot of investment is in more sustainable aviation fuels. So, for instance, if we can, for instance, create kerosene is the main form of fuel used in jet planes at the moment. If we can, for instance, make a significant part of the kerosene from various synthetic or biological methods which reduce the overall carbon footprint, now that's already helping to go a long way to reducing the carbon footprint from flying. Beyond that, obviously, is the holy grail would be some form of propulsion which doesn't involve fossil fuels at all. But I think initially that's going to be particularly focused on short haul flights. So if you do have electric propulsion or battery powered sort of planes, then those will be for short haul flights, probably under 1,000 kilometers. I think for the longer haul flights, carbon neutral flying is further away.
Yes. Now, of course, that's kind of down the road, and as you said, it's a little bit more difficult because it's it just takes more energy for the planes than it does for trains. Now, one of the reasons that I will take a plane over a train is usually not with time, but with price, because a Ryanair flight is usually cheaper than for me to take the train, even though I have the time. Like, I would take the train because I have the time, but it's a money saving thing. So what are some of the things maybe the ITC does, or things that we can do to pressure government bodies to make trains more or make them cheaper for the people, or to subsidize them in a way? Because that's something that's holding me back from taking the train as much as I should, and as much as I actually would like to.
It's a good question, but I think there's a fundamental problem here, in as much as if you took all the people off the planes and put them onto the train, you would find the overcrowding would be horrendous. There's simply not the capacity on rail to cope with substituting all those people flying with putting them onto rail. And actually, per mile traveled,
very good points.
Per mile travelled, rail is always, just because of the infrastructure that is involved, going to be much more expensive than flying. So sadly, I think unless the subsidy for rail, or unless you live in a society where people are prepared to pay much more through taxation for rail, it's going to be quite difficult to make it cheaper than flying, without also at the same time putting a lot of extra taxes on aviation and flying, and trying to discourage using the, as we say, the stick as well as the carrot.
Yeah, very good point.
One thing
Kris,
one thing that should bring the price of rail down is post-COVID, many people are working much more flexibly. And some research the ITC has done is showing that there's more leisure travel. So the actual demand for rail travel is evening out, and you don't have to provide for those peaks in the morning and evening, which is very expensive because the trains go into the cities full up and go back empty. So actually it's a lost leader often commuting. Now it's all evening out, and we do hope that that might even out the cost, reduce the cost, and make it cheaper to use rail.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Matthew. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a very interesting
go ahead, Matthew. Yes.
aspect in there, which is that we produced the Why Travel book when it came out last year, of course, with COVID still causing massive problems in terms of travel and lockdowns, and had only just ended in the UK, and it's been very interesting to look at what effect the pandemic has had on travel behaviour. And as Kris mentioned, one of the fascinating things, at least in Britain, is that there's been a very significant shift from why we are travelling, as in we're doing less business travel, there's less commuting. But quite a lot of that has been taken up by an increase in leisure travel. So I think the pandemic has forced people to prioritise what they do when they travel in different ways.
Definitely. Well, okay, let's touch on that then a bit, because I think some people might argue, oh, if it's just for leisure, we shouldn't be doing it because of environmental reasons, right? But as you mentioned in the book as well, that's not really true, because it's healthy to travel. Not only it's healthy physically, as you describe in the book, but it's also healthy from a psychological standpoint. So can you touch a little bit more on that, like why we need to travel and why leisure doesn't mean that it's not necessary?
Can I just start by referring perhaps to the arts? And you think about, just think about your favorite music, your favorite paintings, think of Picasso, think of Van Gogh, people like that. If they hadn't traveled, what would they be drawing? What would they be writing about, and so on? So, and then think about books, your favorite books. Much of the that literature, I wouldn't mind betting, is set in exotic places or places different from where you grew up. So, if you just take that one chapter on the arts, you can understand, I think, what we're trying to say here on the value of travel. And it's almost impossible to imagine a world, even, before aeroplanes were invented, the grand tour of Europe, discovering America. If all those things hadn't happened, where would we be as a society? We'd be, running around living in caves still, I should think.
Definitely, and you're bringing up a lot of the historical aspects of it. But in the book, you also mentioned the study where they just ask people to think that they're solving the problem in a place that is far away. Right? Like in other words, it was social distancing. So being separated from an event by the temporal, social, or spatial distance actually promotes creative thinking. Right?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I mean, the first two chapters of the book are were by Charles Pasternak, who was an evolutionary biologist, and by Tony Hiss, who's a famous American author who's written very widely on a range of things. But the chapters related to his book called In Motion, in which he looked at the psychological reasons why travel seems to be so important. And going back to your health point, I mean, I think there are two aspects to the health benefits of travel. You've got the physical side, which comes through the way in which our bodies respond, particularly to active forms of travel, whether that's running, cycling, or swimming. There are very clear ways in which our bodies tend to produce chemicals which improve our sort of sense of well-being, as well as making us fitter and healthier through those different forms of movement. Charles Pasternak's, Professor Pasternak's chapter is very interesting in linking that back to our evolutionary history, back to, say, the savannas of East Africa, whereby we had to be sort of scanning wide distances and being able to travel over kind of long distances in order to survive and to capture the food that we needed to survive. But as you say, there's been a lot of work done more recently on the mental health benefits of movement and travel, and it became a very important aspect, for instance, during the pandemic, when there were big concerns about what this might mean for people's mental health. And in Britain, at least, one of the key things that people said kept them sane was that ability to go out into their local area for a couple of hours a day, particularly if they were walking or cycling, and that, I think, on its own demonstrated that power of just sort of getting outside, moving, and feeling the well-being that just comes from that in a very simple way.
Yes. Another thing this makes me think about now, I don't know if I missed this in the book, but do you talk about third culture children in the book at all?
Kris, that's
Sorry,
probably more on
no.
your sociological side.
Yeah, could you?
Third culture kids. Do you mention that in the book?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Expand it a bit.
Okay, I think it might be interesting for a future edition or just on the site as well, but third culture kids are kids like me, kids that grew up in 3 or more different countries before a certain age, right? And because of that, they are very open to different experiences. Those are some of the positive psychological effects, right? They're usually open to different experiences, open to different opinions, and that defines me. On the flip side, there's the negative impacts as well, where they have a bit of an identity crisis. And when I was younger, I definitely went through that. And I think since I keep traveling and keep throwing myself into new experiences, I do have the negative side of that as well. And I noticed that on a psychological level that travel has done wonders for me, but it also has affected me negatively in some ways, especially with finding identity. Kris, do you have any more insight into that?
Well,
can you help me, in other words?
Yes, I mean, there are chapters on exploration and migration, and the evidence suggests that when people first migrate, say, for instance, people that went to America, particularly in the 19th and early 20th century, they do everything they can to integrate with that society, in the sense that they feel, they've got to prove they've made the right decision, they belong. But then the next generation, who are born in America, have this great urge to understand more about the society that their ancestors came from, and would actually, adopt the food from Poland or Jewish food or whatever their parents or grandparents came from. So it does seem that we need to feel we belong somewhere and have a sense of who we are. And if we have that firmly established, then we can travel around and feel comfortable with it. But otherwise, we're constantly wandering and don't feel we belong anywhere, and that's probably not very good either. So I think the fact that travel enables us to discover our roots or the roots of our grandparents or ancestors and relate to that. So I think that, again, we do need to belong somewhere and explore that. But increasingly, we understand different cultures. I mean, in Britain, the percentage of mixed marriages is increasing, and people are increasingly having one parent from one culture and one from another, and want to explore those two cultures. So, I think as long as you have an interest in where you read, where other societies work and where you might have come from years ago, there's a huge industry in people finding out their family trees and going, back to the countries that they came from years ago.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's a little bit easier for someone like me to do because I can kind of track down my family tree. But what about for some of the people, let's use America as example, because you used America as an example as well. A lot of African Americans are unable to track their roots down, right? And that kind of also leads to certain identity issues. What are some things people can do in those cases when you can't really track your historical roots?
Well, more and more evidence is coming out of how DNA can identify and track such origins. And, I think quite a lot of people are using that to understand more about their origins. But it is a terrible thing that people who were forcibly taken to America as slaves do not have that history and that culture, which they are beginning to discover. I mean, this is the work of James Baldwin. He's written a lot about this, about the importance of that cultural background being missing.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible thing for people.
I'm thinking also, Kris, of the distinction you highlighted based on some of the work that's been done recently on between people who are were categorized as somewheres and people who are categorized as anywheres. Do you remember that was sort of applied to political views? What was the thinking behind that, and how does that manifest itself?
I think that some people find it quite difficult to take a global view of the world, and it's often related to right-wing politics, with extreme patriotism, and those people often psychologically struggle with their own identity. And this is shown, in debates like Brexit, where a strong element of not wanting to leave the EU was the feeling that it was too big an organisation, we didn't belong. Whereas other people, and particularly there's an age issue here, young people in particular who've grown up with social media, have this view that we are a global community and that, Spaceship Earth, we're all in it together, and that perhaps age is much more important than other aspects of one's identity. And, the gap year, I think, epitomizes that. So many people have their lives transformed by their gap year. And I think, it's a great thing that happens.
Can I hear a bit about your gap year? Or if you didn't have a gap year, maybe your first pivotal travel experience.
Well, that was
really learned something about yourself, or
well, I had a grant to do my PhD and go to America to study co-ops as a form of organisation, and it was enough money for 6 months. But when I got there, everyone was so fantastic and welcoming. It lasted me for 2 years. And I can remember traveling across America all around, because co-ops are very, funnily enough, very common in America. They have rural phone co-ops, food co-ops, furniture co-ops, all sorts of co-ops. So everywhere I went in America, there were co-ops to study. And I can remember going across America. I invested some of my grant in a sheepskin coat to keep warm in Washington, D.C. And as I gradually got across the country, I got warmer and warmer. I can remember leaving this sheepskin coat in a dustbin somewhere when I got to Las Vegas. So that was a great year. And Las Vegas, where I went to a conference of farming co-ops, was amazing, spending all day talking about farming co-ops and coming out in the evening and the full blast of Las Vegas with the gambling and the lights and Elvis Presley performing live. So that was my gap year. It was great. And then, I might add, I got engaged to an American, but then got homesick. So I did a bunk and came back to England.
Oh, wow. Oh. So, well, of course, since you did it for your PhD, it influenced your career path as well. But anything else personally, like, did it change the way you approach life at all?
I think there are elements of it. I was asking one of the directors of Shell this question just last night. He did a gap year and went all over, and I said, reflect on where you are today, 40 years later. How did that impact on you? And I think it's a question everyone could ask themselves. And I think for me, it was understanding how generally everywhere you go, people are really welcoming and nice. You know, I think there's a default part of human nature that you make strangers welcome. And it's given me tremendous faith and optimism in the ability of humanity to solve problems. You know, in spite of wars and things, I'm still pretty optimistic based on that personal face-to-face contact with strangers, the kindness of strangers.
Definitely. And I think that kind of ties into what you mentioned earlier with the politics, right? Where, well, right-wing politics can be associated with not having the same global view. And even though I think right-wing and left-wing is a little bit of a false dichotomy, I've noticed people who might have certain right beliefs or right ways of thinking about certain issues, they go travel, and when they come back, they might still hold some of the same beliefs, but when it comes to immigration and when it comes to certain ways of approaching those policies, they suddenly have a little bit more of a liberal approach, which is interesting, just through travel.
And you know, the world's changing all the time. When I was in my teens, homosexuality was illegal. The way women were treated was appalling, you know, and all that has changed. And young people today have led many of those changes, and they don't even remember those bad old days. So, you know, I'm very optimistic about that future. And even, you know, at the moment, we've got the World Cup being played in Qatar, where homosexuality is illegal. Well, you know, when I grew up, it was illegal too. But I think the more people see that those things happen and it's quite a normal way of living, the better it is. And in the end, I wouldn't be surprised if in even 10 years, countries like Qatar recognise homosexuality and give women more rights. It's unstoppable once you meet other people and are exposed to other cultures.
Well, that feels really good to hear from you, Kris, because I know you're someone who's very involved and, well, you're an expert in all of this. So to hear such an optimistic point of view gives me hope as well. So Matthew, what about your gap year?
Well, I didn't really, I suppose, sort of have a gap year, and certainly can't compete with Chris's fantastic story. But perhaps I would highlight her.
That was incredible.
I would highlight her great insight about travel, helping to learn about the kindness of strangers. The first time I went abroad, we weren't. At the time, my family wasn't very wealthy, and we didn't go abroad. And the first opportunity I had was was the German exchange. We had this sort of scheme or this opportunity to where a young person from one family would go and stay with a young person from another family for 2 or 3 weeks, as a way of kind of just immersing yourself in this in a different language, in a different kind of environment. And I must have been about quite 12 years old. I mean, certainly didn't speak any German to any sort of significant degree, and suddenly I was having to go off on my own through an airport, which I'd never done before, to stay with this family. And it was very alarming, I suppose, at the time, but it was fantastic just because it suddenly, not only was I very welcomed, and we had a very fascinating time, but it also was something where you suddenly realized that there were other people in other countries who do live like you do and have the same kind of experiences, but in a slightly kind of different kind of way. And it also, I think, helps to rethink some of the stereotypes that happen. I mean, in Britain, for instance, tends to be a very because of the history, a very popular sort of attitude towards Germany as a place that we fought in 2 world wars and we lose against it always in the football. So there was this kind of popular relationship. And going there, for instance, and we went to see many sort of places, but also some of those places, for instance, that had been very heavily bombed by Britain and America, the Allies, in the Second World War, and some of the destruction that had been caused woke you up to realise that there was a much bigger, a much wider perspective that you get on history from travel than you would have had otherwise. So that certainly was a very formative experience.
Nolan, one of the things I regret when I was young, it was quite common to hitchhike, and I think that sadly now people are a little bit more hesitant about hitchhiking, but that used to be great, to meet new people and just set off for a day out and sometimes not know where you might end up and so on. And you know, now people are talking about shared use of taxis, demand responsive transport. I was in Cyprus where they have shared taxis which go around the village. And again, that's back to what we were saying earlier about great experience, where you meet other people in a relatively safe environment, but they're people you wouldn't normally meet or relate to if you just drove everywhere in the cocoon of your own car all the time. So I think that, you know, travel in itself is important. And one of the ways I traveled around America was by coach or Greyhound bus. And that was an amazing experience. You know, people would get on with chickens and goodness knows what, and you'd end up in the middle of Omaha in the middle of the night with all sorts of odd people and so on. Imagine if you hadn't had that opportunity to mix with other people in that way. And when you meet them, say, I don't know, in a dating agency or something, it's very artificial in the sense that you're stuck together and you've got to talk. Whereas when you're traveling, you can sit next to someone and not say anything for a long time, but then you can say something without even looking at them because you're both looking forward. So I think there's a lot of dynamics of travel which make us the human beings we are, probably. So I'm still interested in coaches, and I'm constantly trying to persuade people to use coaches more. You know, it's not all about trains. Young people do travel by coach a lot, and it's a cheap, good form of travel. And I've actually made a couple of TV programs about coaches. So I'm very pro coach.
Ah, okay. Interesting. Now, I don't know the stats on this. Is coach use going down quite a bit, or is it steady? Is it going up? What's happening with that?
It varies by country and country. I mean, some countries don't have a very extensive rail network like Scotland. So they've done really imaginative things with coach hubs just outside the big cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow. Spain has always been good on coaches, and I would like to see the motorway network have, if you like, the equivalent of railway stations at motorway service stations. So you could get some really good journeys much quicker than going in and out of the cities, leaving the motorways. So I think that would be great. And that would actually be quite inexpensive way of traveling.
Yes, it's true.
Definitely. Now, from my experience, what I've noticed in, where I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, I grew up in a town close to there, which was 5 hours away. And we used to have the Greyhound. And that was a really inexpensive, easy way to commute between the cities. And that doesn't exist anymore. And now people are relying on car share options. Would you encourage people to use car share and to push that further, companies such as BlaBlaCar and things like that? Or do you think we should have a stronger push for coaches?
I think we should do both, but I do think that the countries that have really developed an infrastructure for coaches show there's huge potential here. And you use a lot less carbon with a coach full of people, of course, than you do car sharing. So do both. But, I think everything you do, it would be great if people had a ration for travel each year. Mm-hmm. And then people who don't travel much could sell their points to other people. And that would be a good way
that's a
of
really good idea.
What do you think of that? I mean, some people
think I love that.
Yeah. I mean, some people think that's way out of, way off the agenda. But I think that would be quite an interesting idea.
I think so too. And listeners, please, I'm encouraging you to comment on whatever platform you're listening on right now, or tune into Without Borders, or check out the website Why Travel. Now, all the links will be in the description, and everything we're talking about today, if you have any ideas, I think Matthew and Kris are thinking the same as me, like, please become part of the conversation, because this is incredibly important right now. Matthew, what do you think about that?
I think it would be a fascinating experiment. I'm sure it would be, I fear it would be politically impossible, simply because you can imagine what certain aspects of the media would say, that this was like a totalitarian kind of state restricting our travel to a certain number of miles a year. And people would see this as an incredible infringement on their liberties, when actually, I think as a social experiment, it would be a fascinating way, actually, of making travel probably more equitable, and also, I think, making people rethink why they're traveling, if you had a travel budget, and where to prioritize their travel means. Another question would be how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it in terms of the number of miles you travel each year, or are you going to budget it in some other way? Because, of course, if it's by the number of miles, that would encourage people perhaps to focus more on local travel than on long distance.
You could have a lifetime allowance, couldn't you? And then, you could get to be 80 and you'd find that you used your miles up.
Yeah. I'm going to give this some thought. Now, to bring this into a slightly different direction, but just talking about equity and equality here, this is a topic that's come up on the show a few times. And that's kind of the racism that's existent in the bureaucratic system when it comes to travel and the ability to move. For instance, people who come from many developed nations are able to go to other countries freely and easily, right? Whereas people from a lot of developing nations, they don't have this type of freedom, and the bureaucratic process just makes it hell for them. And I've noticed it firsthand moving to Spain. To be honest, the bureaucracy in Spain is slow for everyone. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, or we say in Spanish, grano en el culo. But for me, it's been quite easy because I hold a Belgian passport and a Canadian passport. I'm one of those lucky guys. But my girlfriend, she's from Ukraine, And she's just been going through hell with the bureaucratic process, and they make it so difficult, and there are so many more steps to go through. And it took the war for her to be able to come to Canada. So she applied, this was just for a traveler's visa, right? And she's a girl without a criminal record, like goes to school, but doesn't have money in the bank. And she's Ukrainian. So even though she's family, because we're common law, pareja de hecho, she's got rejected from Canada just for entering for a holiday. And then the war broke out, and then she applied again, and then they're like, okay, now you're allowed in. So it took a war for her to be treated the same as I did. What are some ways we can fix that? Because I think that's a huge issue when it comes to travel and, in a sense, transport.
I had an aunt who was a bit loony, but I think her view was that we should abolish passports completely and see how people distributed themselves around the world. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I think if we didn't have all these borders and bureaucratic things, we might be pleasantly surprised. After all, in the UK, anyone from the Commonwealth could come and live here until the 1960s, when we started having rules about things. And, you know, it was a very reasonable way of managing. We advertised for staff when we needed them in the NHS and so on, and it didn't get out of hand. So I do wonder what would happen if we just abolished borders, which is, of course, the name of your podcast. And yeah. I think we panic.
So I think a lot about.
Yeah, we think about that. We panic about it, and maybe we don't need to.
It's a very interesting aspect, because when you say without borders, actually within Europe, there's been this fantastic experiment to remove borders. You know, the whole principle of the sort of Schengen movement has been to do this, and it's very interesting to see the way in which that's developed, and how that's changed, particularly for younger people, their experience of travel moving across. And interestingly, when Kris mentions about the immigration policy, of course, in Britain until very recently, we had this sort of freedom of movement that we were part of across the whole European continent, and that resulted in you know, a very open sort of system of travel across Europe. And what has happened, sadly, is that as we saw, that when that was used by many people to come and live and work in Britain, you ended up with the Brexit referendum, which then put a stop to it. And amazingly now, we're ending up in a situation where I think from next year, people in Britain will face some of the same obstacles that you mentioned, because before the Brexit happened, Britain was involved in developing a new mechanism for increasing security around, in terms of entry and exit to the European Union, which of course all British people are now going to be subject to. And I think with fingerprinting and all kinds of other bureaucratic measures, it's going to be interesting to see how people react when they realise that, as difficult as travel out of the UK at the moment is, it's going to become, to Europe, it's going to become a whole lot more difficult from next May. So it's a great idea in theory, but I think as we've experienced in our country, it's a policy which sadly seems to result in a lot of pushback socially.
Definitely, yeah, complicated issues. A lot to think about.
Don't you think
here.
It might be fun if we had a bigger worldwide system of swapping lives with each other for a year? You know, I wouldn't mind living in Africa. I'd swap with someone from Africa, and it would be so easy. He could have my flat, and I could live in his hut.
Oh, definitely. The people I know who do that, they have nothing but interesting stories, and I've never heard a negative experience from the people who do these house swaps. I've always heard something interesting about it. So yeah, I'm definitely on that side as well.
So let's have a bigger swapping system.
I agree. Now, abolishing passports, I mean, I haven't really thought about that much. I'd have to think about it a bit more to have anything useful to say. But of course, having more of like a European system spread around the world, that's something I'd be all for. But Matthew, as you state as well, it's very difficult, and that actually might end up resulting in even more pushback in the end. Now, another thing that I've learned about is this project Plumia, and they're looking to create an online country. And the idea behind it is that you could get a passport from this country, and then like that would allow you to travel from there. Now,
that sounds fascinating.
What it looks like is to be able. Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, I like the idea behind it, right? Because their mission statements are about making it more inclusive and giving people from developing nations the same opportunity to be able to travel and not go through the same those bureaucratic nightmares. But on the flip side, the only way they're thinking right now to obtain this is that there has to be a certain check, and that check involves your career and your income, right? Which of course, again, causes problems, because then you're holding people back who didn't have the opportunity to make a certain amount of money. What do you think about this idea of an online country? Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think this is plausible?
I think it's interesting, because if you think of some of the countries like Ireland, where they've been fighting each other for years, and it's all about the boundaries. Imagine if you just self-identified of which country you felt you wanted to pay your taxes to. You know, it would be a bit like the American system of local and national tax, wouldn't it? And then you would have an income, and you would respect the laws of that country, and it might avoid many of the territorial civil fights that go on. So I think it's very interesting. I hadn't heard about it, but I'd really like to know more about that. Maybe you could develop that idea, Nolan.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I'll send you an article I wrote about it as well. It was one of the first articles on my website. Now, the other thing that scares me a little bit from it is that it's a sister company of Safety Wing. Now, Safety Wing's an insurance company for nomads. I used them. I loved them. They were way less expensive than all the others. The customer support was amazing. So as a business, I do like them. Yep. But just the idea of an insurance company being the parent company of a country, of an online country, kind of makes me nervous.
You've hit the nail on the head there, because, of course, in a physical country, we have something called a government, which, at least in democratic countries, you have some kind of say over who is making the laws and what kind of laws there are. Whereas in an online country, you're going to have some kind of person or some kind of company, at least, that is administrating that online world. And unless there's some way in which the citizens of that online world can participate in that company, maybe it needs to be a mutual or a cooperative to make it work well. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that's the next step. Create a software cooperative which can operate as the government, and in which all the participants have some kind of say. You're going to need that, I think, just politically speaking, in order for it to work, I think, in the longer term.
Yeah, definitely. Kris, any other thoughts on this?
Well, what I think is that the technology that is developing could be actually the route to a very democratically run country, because you could immediately vote on everything. You'd have a referendum, even more than the Swiss do at the moment. And so you could say that it's a technologically driven democracy, couldn't you?
Yeah. Okay, well, lots to think about here. Again, listeners, please become part of the conversation. And okay, well, here we're coming up on an hour here, but I have a few more things I want to cover. Now, there was one quote, Matthew, that I didn't fully understand, and I was wondering if you could expand on it because it's in the philosophy chapter, and it's the one, the soul is no traveler. The wise man stays at home, and when his necessities, his duties, on any occasion call him from his house or into foreign lands, he is at home still.
Well, I think in this chapter, I mean, what struck me when preparing it was that actually a lot of philosophers were real travel skeptics. I think many of them looked at the people around them rushing around and moving from place to place. And some of them were really sort of trying to think about, well, what are these people actually doing? But when reading, for instance, some of the Stoics or people like Thoreau and others, you realize that they actually have made a set of very good points, which is that travel is much more worthwhile and beneficial when we actually have a good understanding of why we're doing it and have thought properly about the reasons why we're doing it and making sure that it's for a good reason. Because as we know, I mean, a lot of international jet setting happens really in a way in which people are almost sort of escaping from some of the problems that perhaps it would be better that they sorted out kind of closer to home. Or it may be, for instance, that travel is being done for reasons which perhaps are not very edifying, for example. So I think that was really an interesting way of from the point that was being made, a way of trying to get us to think much more deeply about, are we traveling for good reasons or for bad reasons?
Yes.
I have to say I'm a little bit opposed to that. I think some of the greatest experiences in life are when something unexpected happens and you take a risk. And I think, carefully considering exactly why you're traveling probably wouldn't go out very much. So, I like chance in life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Well,
I think for me,
I would say to defend Thoreau that maybe we're looking at what he was trying to say was that we can get those chance experiences closer to home through observing and interacting more carefully and closely with those around us than having to travel 100 miles to do so. It's a different perspective. Both sides can be argued convincingly.
Well, Kris, that actually kind of makes me think of what you said at the beginning of our conversation. As you mentioned where you grew up, you had in your city the section where a lot, did you say Hindus?
Hindus and Muslims, different ends of the town, yeah.
And they don't mix and they stay apart. Now, of course, I think we all kind of have the perspective that people should mix and people should learn about each other's cultures. But someone might make the argument, oh, I can just stay in my city and I can learn about these different cultures. I can go to the Muslim area, I can go to the Hindu area and do it that way. Now, would you encourage people to do that over traveling? Or do you think that it's not really a yes or no here, like you can do both or you should do both?
I think what I was referring to really was the reaction to this idea that Paris has developed, the 15-minute neighborhood, where everything you need on a very day-to-day basis is locally. And great, it saves carbon, but I was trying to counteract that with the idea that you stay in your own little hub with all the things you need for your own culture, and it feels comfortable, and convenient, and you can pat yourself on the back with saying you're saving carbon, but you aren't developing that understanding of what you would gain from mixing better, and you don't even go to the middle of town often. And so you have your own culture, your own doctors, your own religious groups. And I just felt, I'm not surprised they've started fighting each other a bit, because they don't ever meet each other. They don't go to the same schools. They have different schools. That, to me, instinctively is not a good idea. And I was very worried that the carbon debate was encouraging the development of that, the planning of communities like that. And I felt I ought to counteract that a bit, at least.
I completely agree with you. If it didn't lead to an audio spike, I would be clapping right now. But, yeah. All right, one more, because I really want to encourage the listeners to check out your website as well and become part of the conversation. And if you have all these leaflets where you briefly summarize a lot of the points that are in the book as well. And one that I thought was an interesting question to think about, and I was hoping you both could give us an answer, and then the listeners could always tune in afterwards. But it's, what role do the emotions play in our travel choices and behavior, and how can transport systems incorporate these insights?
Right, well,
emotions in travel, Kris.
I know we've touched on it already a little bit, right? We've touched on it in different ways, but just to summarize some of the points.
I would hone in on loneliness. I think increasingly in our society, people are lonely. It's partly because we're living longer, and there are we're an aging society. Many elderly people are alone. Many divorced people are living alone, and I don't think that's very good if you don't travel around and meet other people. So, whereas in the past we lived in larger communities, a lot of life took place in the streets, I meet a lot of isolated people. And so I think that travel, particularly the informal travel of sitting next to someone in the bus or a train or a park bench, that is the way forward for humanity and our own mental health.
It's a very good point Kris makes. And on the transport side, it made me think of the French are always very good about in their policy making, sort of thinking about these big issues. And I think there was an experiment on SNCF, the French rail company, to have different, what they called ambiances in their carriages on the trains. So I think one was a sort of play carriage where, particularly for kids, could sort of do the kind of things that they wanted to sort of focus on. One carriage was a sort of library carriage, if you like, for those who wanted quiet sort of contemplation. I think another was a sort of social carriage where you could do you could eat sort of around a table and sort of have a chat. So I thought that's perhaps something that you can obviously do it on a train in a way which you can't do in other places, but you could perhaps incorporate it at stations and other aspects, because everybody faces different on a daily basis, different issues, and is facing a different sort of set of emotions, and perhaps we should think about kind of trying to cater more for each of those in the transport planning.
I haven't thought about that, and I love that idea. It definitely sounds a lot better than the classist system we have now, where you either have the choice between coach and first class, but having the choice between, okay, here's where you can work, here's where you can study, here's where you can socialize. That sounds sounds much better. I think on some trains it exists in a way, the trains that have bars, you can socialize at the bar and you can work on the seat. But no, I love that idea. Okay, well, Kris, Matthew, anything else you want to touch on before we end today's show?
I think that we've covered an awful lot, and actually you've made me think too. I think the conversation has got a lot of open-ended ideas of where we might go. So I think it's the beginning, not the end of a conversation. And the without borders aspect is really interesting. And if we're going to, find a way of creating peace in the world, I do think travel has an important part to play. That's my last message, really.
Well, thank you, Kris. I hope I have you on the show again, because as you say, it feels like the conversation has kind of just started.
Absolutely, and we'd love to do that, I'm sure, because it's such an enormous topic, and one of the things that struck us when preparing this project and writing this book is that travel is such a fundamental part of human existence. It's something which pretty much everyone does in some form or another, and it's another reason, for instance, why on travel and transport questions everybody has an opinion, because it's something that we all do. So as Kris says, this is very much a way of starting discussion, we hope, and debate. And it's been a great today to talk about these issues with you, because it's helped sort of reinforce, there are an enormous number of ways in which all these questions are connected.
Yes. All right, Matthew, Kris, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I learned a lot from you. Remember, listeners, this was Without Borders. You can join in on the conversation at withoutborders.fyi and why travel. Links will be in the description. Tune in next time.